bhavatu saha no bhunaktu saha viryam karavavai tejasvinavaditamastu avidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Peace, peace, peace. And good evening. We're working with the complete works of Swami Abhedananda, and we're looking at his chapter today on the ego and the true self. And I'm Swami Abhedananda. This is Atma, and he'll be doing some of the reading with us. In this lecture, Swami Abhedananda starts out how the religion faces the burning questions of the mystery of death. And this is part of his book explaining the Katha Upanishad and the mystery of death. And he talks about, in this chapter, the idea that relating to his primarily Christian audience of the day, the idea that we are created in God's image, and how this is usually taken rather literally. He says, Vedanta explains the image of God in its most spiritual sense and not in its material sense. The Western minds are often frightfully literal, and that is, they try to understand very literally that if man be the image of God, God must be like a human being, and they jump to that unwarranted conclusion from that analogy. So we're going to skip on down to a couple of paragraphs to where he explains how the students of Vedanta can grasp this idea. All right?
The students of Vedanta can easily grasp the meaning because they do not think of a human God when they try to explain the word image. The ego, or the individual soul, is the image of God, who is the spirit. He is the universal spirit. He is like the self-effulgent sun, and each individual soul is like a reflection of the sun on the mirror of the intellect. As the reflection cannot exist without being related to the object of reflection, so the individual soul cannot exist without being closely related to the spirit, whose reflection it is. If you hold a mirror in the sun, you will see the reflection. But that reflection would be impossible if there was no sun, if the sun were covered by dense clouds. So the reflection is only possible when there is sun overhead. And if we are the reflections or images of God, then we must be of similar nature, because the reflection of the sun cannot be square or triangular, but round, self-effulgent, and bright. And that is our true nature, if we are created in the image of God. And if we are created in the image of God, then we are bright, and we are spirits.
Yes, and this reminds me that this is really our Satwik aspect. You know, Maya is created of these three gunas, the tamas, rajas, and sattva, and the Satwik aspects of Maya are the ones that are revealing. And so thinking of ourselves as a reflection of the divine effulgent Brahman, or sun as the analogy goes, that's thinking of ourselves in this Satwik aspect, that even though theoretically we are one with Brahman, we are thinking of ourselves in this realm of Maya as an individual, and so we think of ourselves as a reflection of that sun. All right, let's continue.
And if we are created in the image of God, then we are bright and we are spirits. But where is that self-effulgent sun, the being whose reflections the individual souls are? He is not very far from us. He is within us and around us, though he is not visible to the eyes. No sense powers can reveal his presence. The materialistic thinkers and the scientists try to understand God through sense powers. When they fail, they deny his existence. They never think for a moment that the sense powers exist in and through God and cannot reveal God. The individual souls also cannot be revealed by sense powers. Only the manifestation of certain activities can be perceived by the senses. And that is all. You cannot tell whether there is a soul in another person or not, but you can imagine that that person is living when he moves, talks, or does certain things. You can guess and infer by observing certain acts. But the reality of the real nature is always imperceptible to our senses. The egos cannot be perceived by our senses if they do not assume certain forms.
Yes, so this idea that really you see this world is like the divine in a costume, you could say. It's in some manifested form that we can perceive with our senses. But what we're perceiving with our senses is not the actual divinity, but it's a manifestation of it. It's a covering of it. It's a costume of it. So just like when you see a person in a particular costume at a masquerade ball or something, you might not at first recognize the person, but then you might get hints of the person's nature because of their speech intonation or the way they move. And when they talk and move, you get hints as to who it is, and you understand that this is your old friend so-and-so. But what you're seeing is not your usual perception of that person. And so the universe is like that. It's the divine hidden in manifestation. All right, let's continue with Swami Abhedananda here.
Now we have understood the relation between God and the individual ego. God himself is sexless. He is both the father and the mother of the universe. And if he is sexless, the individual soul is also sexless. There are some sects who believe in the sex of souls. The Swedenborgians believe in the sex of souls. They hold that the males will remain males forever, and females will remain females forever. That idea is very limited. It does not go far enough. First, the idea seems to be correct, but when you go a little deeper into your true nature, you find that sex conditions are more or less related to the body and the mind, but not to the soul. The soul is higher than sex. There's no masculine soul and no feminine soul, because both are all children of God.
Yes, I think that's a very important point too, is we, especially in, say, Jungian psychology, transpersonal psychology, they emphasize this idea that everyone has a certain masculine and feminine persona within them. And we happen to be physically manifesting one or the others of those, but we have the essence of both in our true nature. It's also interesting that he talks about the Father, Mother, God here, and that was incorporated into the Christian Science theology. Mary Baker Eddy, of course, studied Vedanta through a translation of the Gita, and so some of her ideas are very Vedantic. And she, in their translation of the Lord's Prayer, they start out with Our Father, and then her commentary is that Our Father, Mother, God. So she includes both of those, and she got that from the teachings from India. All right, let's continue.
The individual soul is to be considered as a nexus, the connecting link between the world of senses and the realm of the absolute. It's like a bridge. If we wish to go to the realm of the absolute, we must go over that bridge. And therefore, the individual soul, or the ego, is called the mediator, the bridge. The Christians call it Christ. Christ means the individual soul, or the ego, which is the meditator, which connects the phenomenal world with the absolute. We cannot go to the realm of divinity by any other way except over the bridge of our souls. So if you wish to know God, first know yourself. That is the surest way. If you wish to know Christ, know yourself, and there you will find Christ. Christ does not mean any ordinary human being, but it refers to the child of God. We are all children of God, and when we will realize that truth, we will realize Christ. The historical Christ is limited by time and place. The spiritual Christ is above the categories of space and time, and he is eternal by individual souls. Spiritual Christ dwells in every individual soul from the beginningless past, and it is the real Christ. He is the mediator. He signifies the individual soul in man. Similarly, the soul is eternal and is also immortal, but we cannot attain to immortality unless we have gone over the bridge of our own souls, which alone can lead us to the abode of immortality. Let us now understand the nature of this bridge, the mediator between the mortal and the immortal.
Yes, we have to start where we are. We can't start somewhere else. And notice how skillfully he incorporates all these Christian ideas to his primarily Christian audiences. These lectures were all delivered here in the West, and about 100 years ago, between about 1900 and 1920. So it was part of his active ministry back at the East Coast. And so he's relating everything that they know. So he is definitely bringing them from their set of, their basic set of information to a higher set of information. And of course, this was a time of big struggle among Christians because the scientific discoveries of the previous century were showing that you couldn't take the Bible literally, and this was, of course, the way that most people had been originally taught, a very literal interpretation of the Bible and a literal interpretation of Christianity, and an emphasis on belief rather than practice, frankly, especially in the Protestant traditions, not quite as much in the Catholic tradition. And so he was bringing them from that background into a much more higher understanding. I'll take a little turn reading here. We can grasp the nature of our soul by means of analysis and also by studying our own self, as well as by understanding our own being. None can give us that supreme knowledge. External teachers may give us certain suggestions, but in the last resort, it is up to you to work out your salvation. Each individual must find out for himself where the soul is and what it is like. It is the most difficult task, yet it must be courageously undertaken. It is difficult when we are lazy or living on the sense plane, when we try to delude ourselves by false thinking. So long as we are sleeping in self-delusion, it is difficult to get it. But if we are awakened and if we have a genuine longing for the truth, it is easy of achievement. Those people who say, "Oh, we are so busy, we have to do so many things, and we have no time to think of ourselves, to think of God," are deluding themselves and are wasting their energy fruitlessly. They are only working for their bread and butter and a little sense pleasure. After hard labor, they retire to bed and wake up to labor again. And this round of works of sleeping, eating, and drinking is eternally going on time. There is no rest. They neglect their own selves. The ordinary people do not open their eyes and do not know anything beyond certain limits. But man who has sense and understanding will pity these souls as to what they are doing and what they are trying to accomplish, and how foolish they are to waste their time and energy for things which do not amount to anything and which do not bring any consolation, happiness, and knowledge of ourself, our own being, and our relation to God. It does not explain to us how we are going to gain immortality, nor does it tell us whether we are at all capable of immortality. But we have no time to seriously discuss these vital issues, Sad it is to think and to live under such degrading circumstances. Let's see. Yeah, let's read a little more, and then we're going to do a little music. So why don't you read, can you read the next paragraph? We're going to talk here about the nature of the problem that our egos are working through our sense organs and going out for sense pleasures. So let's read his analogy here.
In order to analyze ourselves and also to find out the relation between the senses, mind, intellect, and the egos, we must make a picture. Here the ruler of death gives an illustration, which may help the seekers after the absolute truth.
Yeah, remember this is his commentary on the Katha Upanishad, so he's speaking from that standpoint.
That illustration is as follows. Think of your body as like a chariot. The rider is the soul, and the horses are the senses. Sense organs and sense powers are the horses. The driver is the intellect, and the mind are the reins. The objects of the senses are the roads where these horses are traveling or running. Now make a picture of that in your mind. You're a chariot, your true self is the rider, and the horses are the sense powers which are going in different directions. Then you will be able to understand the relation between the senses, sense powers, mind, and intellect, and your conscious ego. You will also understand how they exist and what relations they bear to each other. Now, if the rider be our true self, which is called in Sanskrit the Atman, which is the eternal and immortal part of our own self, as well as the prime mover of our thoughts and actions, then the rider itself is above and beyond all imperfections. It is not affected by the sensation of pleasure or pain, but the ego is affected. The thinker, the doer, and the knower of pain is not the true self, but is the thinking man, eating man, drinking man, planning man, and working man. It is the ego which is imbued with I consciousness. But behind this ego, you will find the rider, the true self.
Yeah, so Ramakrishna used to say that if it, once you can realize that you're not the doer, that you will be free this very moment. And so this is the idea that the ego makes us think that the senses are in charge and that we need to get all these different things and that I am the doer and I'm so-and-so and I'm important and so forth. So in the musical selection, it's another selection from the Chandi. Now, of course, we just celebrated the great victory of Durga against Mahisasura. That's the middle story in the Chandi. And as Swami Harinamananda pointed out in his lecture a couple of years ago on the Chandi, the three stories in the Chandi can be thought of symbolically as representing the battle against the three aspects of the ego. The first story is the tamasic ego that doesn't even want creation to get started. So there's a plot to slay Brahma so that the creation can't get started, and the Divine Mother has to help Vishnu defeat Madhu and Kaitaba. Then the middle one is the Rajasik ego. And in ordinary historical terms, you can think of Mahisasura's ego as being like someone like Genghis Khan, who just goes out and conquers and slaughters and gets what he wants that way. There's nothing particularly enlightened about it. But then the third story, we're working with the Satwik ego, which is a lot more subtle. And you could think of that as some of the great rulers that promoted culture in their societies. They were thought of as great rulers. Think people like Catherine the Great or Queen Elizabeth I or Queen Victoria, but they still had their ruthless side and they walked over people and got what they wanted. But it was kind of covered with a veneer of we're very cultured and we're very proper and we're very sophisticated and so forth. And so this is the Satwik Ego. And in the musical presentation that we're going to have tonight, represents the first part of this third story, where, again, the gods, the devas, have been defeated by the asuras, and Shumba and Nishumba have taken charge. But they gather everything that's beautiful and fine. And so in order to defeat them, the Divine Mother whips up this nice plot where she becomes this very beautiful and alluring woman, and of course they then have to have her. And so then it goes through a series of battles. We're not going to go through the whole thing. That would take the whole evening. But we'll get through this first section, and you'll see how the Divine Mother is really playing it up big. She knows how to flirt, you could say, and trap these people into this battle. And I patterned this music after a trick that some opera composers use, where there is like a musical background. So you're like in a court setting where the courtiers are enjoying music in the background, and so then they sing over that, but their melodies are not, are only, they go with the instrumental accompaniment behind, but it's not directly related to it. And then the next episode will end with the section where they send their great chieftain Dhumalochana to defeat the Divine Mother and bring her back to the palace. And she defeats them with a piercing tone. So let's listen to that section.
Engaged in praise and adoration, poverty came to the Ganga to bathe.
Are you praising
Praise and adoration, poverty came to the Ganga to bathe. Then from above, praise and adoration, ocean's body came to
the devas are appealing to me because Shumba and Nishumba have defeated them in battle. Behold that woman of captivating beauty.
Our King Shamba should possess her.
Yes, we should invoke him of her beauty.
O great King and unknown woman of surpassing beauty, she dwells in the mountains. Since you have appropriated all things of value, why should this woman not be seized for you as well? You serve me well, since I was created to this woman to entice her. To entice her, to entice her, with sweet words that she will quickly come to me.
Oh, Daphne, my dear, you should know that our Shumba, the king of all Asuras, is sovereign supreme, and I am Sugriva, his messenger, most loyal. I'm here to tell you he always gets the best of every genre. Everything precious to a being celestial is now in his palace royal. now let
So you have something to look forward to. But the essence of it is that the Satwik Ego sort of covers things up with a veneer of culture, you could say, and refinement, but it's still going after sense pleasures, and it still needs to be defeated. So the Divine Mother comes in to do that for us. And so as we do our Durga Japam and pray to the Divine Mother, we're asking her to defeat our egos, to help us conquer our own egos so that we can realize that we're not the doer, that she's the doer, and that will lead us to liberation. So now let's see if I can remember where we were here.
You find the writer, the true self.
Yes, okay. Do you want to continue?
This ego is a combination of the true self, the intellect, the mind, and the sense powers. It is all combined. When all these different powers are fused into a whole, that whole is the ordinary ego. The ordinary man or woman who thinks, I'm the son or daughter of Mr. So-and-so, I have my children, my family, or my work to do, is the mortal ego. But the mortal man is, in reality, an immortal entity, where it can be said that the immortal entity forms the background of the mortal man, or the ego who thinks and feels. Now, in this chariot, the driver is responsible for all the good and evil deeds which are done or which are received. If the driver be not careful, the horses will drag the chariot down into the ditch. The horses are very powerful. The horses will become unruly if the driver is not strong. If the driver does not know how to manage those horses, the ego will suffer. On the contrary, if the driver knows the right path and the right way by which he can manage the horses, there will be no suffering, no doubt, and no sorrow. A man who is dull of understanding and whose mind is unbridled cannot naturally control the horses or his senses. The ordinary person who is living on the sense plane and is under the influence of sense powers cannot control the horses because the driver is not strong and he has not proper understanding and adequate self-control, with the result that the horses get the upper hand and drag the driver, willingly or unwillingly, in any direction they desire.
You know, I think we have a even a harder time in the modern age than people did before, because we're constantly bombarded by advertisement, and the advertisers know how to get to you. They know how to feed into your weakest parts and to feed into your ego. You have to have that new car because that makes you feel like somebody, you know, you're powerful, or you're somehow more successful if you drive a big fancy car. And you have to go out and have a great dinner that's made up of fancy foods, and you have to have fancier clothes. You have to look like the movie stars and so forth. So all of this is just constantly feeding into that egoistic part of ourselves that tells us we have to have all these special things in order to be who we are. Actually, what they're trying to do is get you to be who they want you to be so that you'll buy more stuff. And so we have to be even more diligent these days, I think, than people did before. If you're living out in the country, or you're living in a small village and there's no TV, there's no radio, there's no magazines, there's none of that stuff, you don't even know you're missing things. You just live happily the way you are because that's all you know. And so how much better off they were in those days. But the more challenges we have, the stronger we get. So it's like, going to the gym. If the weights were all made out of styrofoam and didn't weigh anything, you wouldn't make any progress. So we're living in a time when there are lots of challenges, and so we get stronger by facing all those challenges. Why don't I read a paragraph or two? We will find that the vast majority of men have no control over their horses. You will also find many people standing on the sidewalk looking at the shop windows, attracted by certain things. And immediately they want to possess those things and to go to buy. If you have no money, they will lift those things and go to jail, and all kinds of trouble will come afterwards. That is the attraction, and the sight of a thing produces such an impression. And the driver did not possess understanding and self-control, and consequently they went into the ditch, that is, went into jail, and suffered terribly. All kinds of robbery, theft, murder, and other crimes are committed by those who have no right understanding and self-control. But if such a person had a little self-control and would have exercised proper reasoning in dissuading him from the mad pursuit of the object of allurement, he would have avoided many problems and pains. He who has right understanding and whose mind is always firmly held holds all the horses together. So if you do not pay any attention to a thing, or if you do not allow yourself to be distracted by it, it does not affect you in the least. That driver holds the reins of the power of attention, and he whose mind is always firmly held has senses under control like good horses of a charioteer. The horses obey such a driver, and you see, such as in ordinary driving, if the horse knows that the driver is not strong, the horses will take his own course. So it is with us in our chariot. The horses are the senses, and when they find the driver is not firm and the reins are not tight, they go astray and do whatever they please and drag the rider also and bring all kinds of trouble and suffering. Therefore, every one of us should remember this illustration. It is very helpful. And whenever you are overpowered by some attraction, just remember this illustration. If you can hold the reins of the mind firmly and use the power of discrimination and understanding properly, you will have no trouble, no matter wherever you go in this wide world. And you have to kind of project yourself into the future and realize that these things really aren't going to make you happy. It's not just that you're going to deny yourself and say, I'll just resist. You don't want to just bury those things. You want to sublimate them. You want to realize that what's really going to be important when you're lying on your deathbed or any of those things going to really matter. You see, they don't. It's the spiritual development that you have that matters, and it's the amount of self-control that you have that matters. And so you can easily realize that the wiser course is to be restrained and not to fall into the trap. And to also realize that you want to be in control of your senses. You don't want your senses to be in control of you. All right, so you want to read a paragraph or two?
He who has no power of discrimination and is always unmindful and impure never reaches perfection, but remains in the world of imperfection. Here is another thing to be considered, that if we are not mindful of our own self as well as of our own duties, and if we are impure in our thoughts and ideas, we cannot attain to perfection. In order to achieve perfection, we must first of all purify our own selves, purify our minds, purify our senses, exercise self-control, and use discrimination. Understand the moral, mental, physical, and spiritual laws properly and live up to those laws.
Yes. So, basically he's recommending this idea that to keep your mind pure, you have to keep your thoughts pure, and you have to choose what you're going to think about and what you're going to expose yourself to carefully. And he says most people are devoid of discrimination, vichara, and viveka. Discrimination is a thing which they do not know what it is like. If you discriminate between what is right and what is wrong, you can get rid of lots of trouble. Right discrimination is the highest guide in this world. A person who lacks discrimination lives quite naturally in the darkness of ignorance and suffers consequently endless pains and miseries in life. Okay, why don't you read a paragraph?
If you walk on the street on a cold morning and do not know where there is ice, and if you just look up at the clouds, or shut your eyes, and step over stone or rock or slippery ground, you may fall and suffer and break your neck. You will have to exercise the power of attention and discrimination. Of these two things, you must not be unmindful in your works, in your daily life, and in your duties. And at the same time, you must use discrimination and pure thoughts, and then pure ideas must be held as pure friends. Impure thoughts and impure ideas will lead us into misery. Impure thoughts are never helpful. In order to purify our minds and inner nature, we must cherish holy thoughts in our mind. Everything that is uplifting, everything that is beneficial to mankind, everything that makes us unselfish, everything that makes us forget ourselves, and everything that helps us in cultivating conscious self-denial are the ideals of life. Every time we deny ourselves, we grow richer. The more we give, the more we receive.
Yes, and the more self-restraint, the stronger you get. So it's remembering that strength is what you want. Spiritual strength is what you want. And so people who practice self-restraint are actually making themselves stronger and stronger. And of course, this also leads to the idea of holy company, too. The kind of company you keep also will help you to keep your mind in the right place. And so this is much more difficult if you're living in the world, of course, because you have to relate to co-workers and so forth. And I can remember when I was a teacher, many times teacher gatherings wouldn't be all that uplifting. They would talk about things that I had absolutely no interest in. And so, but you know, sometimes you have to put up with some of these things and just be polite. But you don't need to deliberately make yourself miserable by finding extra opportunities or just you know, taking extra time to be with people that you don't really have a spiritual relationship with. So let's see, where were we? The one,
This
the more
one
we get,
thing.
yeah, okay. This one thing.
This one thing we must learn, that every time we deny ourselves a certain thing we want, and if we find we can get along without that thing and give that energy or that thing to some other person whose need is greater than ours, that is denying ourselves. Instead of trying to grab everything from everybody else, instead of having that feeling of possession, cheating and robbing others of their legitimate dues, instead of holding such impure thoughts, we must hold thoughts of truthfulness, that we should never cheat anybody. No matter how often we may be cheated or robbed, we should never cheat others. Make that firm resolution that you shall never do any wrong to anybody, no matter how you may be injured or hurt or robbed. And that would be your principle under all conditions. If you starve, you should not sacrifice your principle, but rather sacrifice your body than your principle. That kind of firmness is necessary. If you teach your children such ideas when they grow up, they will be Christ-like. On the contrary, if you teach them how to cheat and rob, they will be murderers in the end. They will be criminals. They will fill the state asylums and the state prisons. Why do we have so many murderers in this country? Because they are not trained from their childhood in this way to deny themselves. But they follow the vulgar ideals, which ask them to flourish materially, the other man's expense, by means fair or foul.
Yeah, and so of course Swami Vivekananda would always emphasize unselfishness being the test of all religions. And so this idea of being unselfish is, again, the way of reducing our sense of ego. And so that's, when you look at the different yogas, you can find all these relate to reducing our sense of ego self so that we can be more in touch with our spiritual nature. That's really the key. So in karma yoga, the idea is to do things for others and to think of others, and that reduces your sense of thinking of yourself. It's very simple. In bhakti yoga, you think that you're doing everything for God, and so you're devoting everything to God. And of course, this idea of doership, if we can think that we're not the doer, but that it's God that's the doer. It's the energy of the universe, which is Brahman. Brahman is the energy of the universe, and it acts through the divine Shakti to give us energy. We're all running around on canned sunlight, as John Dobson used to say. It's not our energy, it's canned sunlight coming from the universe, coming from the hydrogen that's trying to fall together to become one again. The hydrogen is all dispersed out in infinite dispersal. And because it's really one, it's trying to become one, and it all falls together by gravity. And that gravity then produces stars, and those stars then shine, and the shining radiates, and it's sunlight. And so all this energy is really the infinite, undivided, and unchanging reality that's behind this universe, which is appearing as finite, divided, and changing. And its struggle to become the infinite, undivided, and unchanging again manifests as the energy of the universe, and that's what we're running on. We're running on that energy of the universe. All right, well, that's our time for tonight. Hopefully we'll get our technical problems ironed out, and we'll play those musical selections for you next time. And in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and victory to the Mother, and may she help us in conquering our egos. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, peace.